Imagine waking up one day to find that the food on your table might disappear, not because of a lack of farmland, but because tiny insects are silently dying out. The honeybee crisis shook the world like a disturbing wake-up call. Without bees, there's no pollination, and without pollination, much of our agriculture collapses. Sounds like an exaggeration? Not at all. Science confirms that over 70% of fruits, vegetables, and nuts depend on them. FAO, 2022. Now here comes the controversy. While many blamed only pesticides and climate change, the real culprit was already working in the shadows, the Varroa mite. A parasite so small it could sit on the head of a pin, yet capable of wiping out entire colonies in just weeks. Counterintuitive, isn't it? The greatest threat to our food security wasn't something massive, it was microscopic. And the quick takeaway from this knowledge is crystal clear. Understanding this story reveals how nature and technology are locked in one of the most critical battles of our time. A battle not fought in science fiction novels, but in apple orchards, almond fields, and even urban gardens. What no one saw coming was that Australia, once considered a safe haven from bee colony collapse, would become the stage for one of the most surprising experiments in beekeeping history. And when the bees began to die there, the outcome was far more unexpected than any expert could have predicted. The mass deaths of bees began drawing global attention. Countries across Europe, the Americas, and Asia were reporting recurring cases of bee colony collapse. Meanwhile, Australia seemed to live in a parallel world, untouched by the Varroa mite. This unique condition gave the country both an economic edge and a reputation as a global reference in Australia beekeeping. While beekeepers abroad struggled to keep their hives alive, Australians were exporting high-quality honey. They also provided safe pollination services to large-scale crops, a direct boost to pollination agriculture, strengthening the production of almonds, apples, and blueberries. For consumers, it meant more affordable and abundant fruit on store shelves. It wasn't just about the market, it was about national identity. Australian honey had become a symbol of purity and resilience. While others faced devastating agricultural losses, Australia's numbers were breaking records. It was as if an invisible shield protected their hives from collapse. But rare advantages can often mask hidden weaknesses. That sense of invulnerability gave rise to overconfidence. The balance felt eternal, yet fate had other plans. And it was at that very moment that an unexpected threat began to loom on the horizon. In June 2022, a historic event shook the confidence of Australian beekeepers. The dreaded Varroa mite was detected for the first time in Newcastle, in the state of New South Wales. The news hit like a bombshell. Up until that point, the region had been considered an impenetrable fortress. The initial shock was likened to discovering a plague in entire fields of wheat or corn. The response was swift and uncompromising, following strict biosecurity protocols. Eradication zones were rapidly established, and thousands of hives were destroyed within days. The order was clear: eliminate any risk of spread. Painful as it was, the action reflected the gravity of the threat. It was like fighting a wildfire, cutting down healthy trees to prevent the flames from spreading. Hive transport was also strictly restricted, directly impacting pollination agriculture contracts. Many farmers, used to moving their colonies across hundreds of miles, suddenly found themselves powerless. This disruption exposed a vulnerability few had considered. Without the mobility of bees, entire crops were at risk of failing to bear fruit. The situation echoed strategies used in tracking human diseases, like epidemics. Just like during COVID-19, infection maps were created to trace the spread of the Varroa mite. But here's the catch: a microscopic parasite hiding among thousands of bees doesn't make itself easy to find. And that very challenge paved the way for something even more devastating. The Varroa mite isn't just an annoying passenger hitching a ride on bees. It feeds on their fat and hemolymph, rapidly weakening their entire system. This drastically lowers the colony's immunity, leaving it exposed to diseases that would once have been easily contained. It's as if every bite opened a door for deadly infections to walk right in. One of the most dangerous aspects of the mite is its role in spreading viruses. The most notorious is the deformed wing virus, which leaves bees unable to fly. Picture an entire hive of workers unable to leave the nest to collect pollen. Within weeks, the colony's inner structure collapses, threatening even the backbone of pollination agriculture. Without proper treatment, the collapse is swift and merciless. Many hives begin to decline within months, sometimes in just a few weeks. For a beekeeper, watching this unfold is like witnessing an entire city slowly emptied of life. And when the bees fall, it's not just the honey that vanishes, it's the delicate balance of the ecosystem itself. The practical consequences stretch far beyond beekeeping. Fruits, vegetables, and nuts rely directly on pollination, and the honeybee crisis puts all of that at risk. Each lost hive means less food on the table, higher prices, and rising food insecurity. And while this disaster unfolded at breakneck speed, one more factor would soon make the situation even more alarming. The initial containment plan seemed solid, but reality told a different story. The Varroa might spread at an alarming pace, driven largely by the movement of hives used in pollination agriculture contracts. Each truck transporting boxes of bees was unknowingly giving the enemy a free ride. In just a few weeks, distant regions were already reporting new outbreaks. Another critical issue was the difficulty in detecting the mite. It reproduces inside capped brood cells, making it invisible even to trained eyes. Many beekeepers believed their colonies were healthy, while the parasite was silently multiplying. This explains why some inspections failed, creating a dangerous illusion of safety. Australia's own environmental conditions also gave the mite an advantage. Long, hot summers combined with milder winters allowed its reproductive cycle to remain active longer. It was as if the climate had rolled out a red carpet for its expansion. This set of conditions further escalated the threat to Australia beekeeping. When the first reports confirmed the outbreak was spiraling out of control, frustration spread quickly. Governments and beekeepers realized they were facing something far more serious than they had anticipated. What began as a localized fight had become a national battle. And in the face of that, a much broader response had to be put into motion. Between 2022 and 2023, Australia launched one of the largest agricultural eradication programs in its history. An estimated 101 to 130 million Australian dollars were invested in an effort to stop the spread of the Varroa mite. The strategy was harsh, entire hives were destroyed, even those that appeared healthy. The logic was simple, yet brutal: sacrifice the present to try to save the future. Around 30,000 hives were eliminated in the process. To grasp the weight of that number, imagine wiping out in just a few weeks the production equivalents to the work of thousands of beekeepers. It wasn't just a loss of honey, it was a direct blow to pollination agriculture. Almond, apple, and blueberry crops immediately felt the impact of reduced pollination services. The economic effect was severe. The decline in pollinator availability led to reduced agricultural productivity across several states, driving up production costs and lowering food supply. For consumers, the result hit their wallets, with higher prices on everyday products. For beekeepers, it meant broken contracts, mounting debt, and deep uncertainty about the future of Australia beekeeping. Still, the government stood by the decision, arguing it was necessary given the scale of the threat. The reasoning was similar to a pandemic lockdown: unpopular decisions, but essential to prevent a much larger collapse. But if the financial cost already seemed heavy, the social and emotional consequences were only just beginning to surface. Among the hardest hit were small-scale beekeepers and hobbyists, who lacked the financial reserves to cope with such devastating losses. Many of these individuals saw their hives as part of the family, not just a source of income. The forced disappearance of their bees left a void that couldn't be measured in dollars. It was an open wound in the culture of Australia beekeeping. Another compounding factor was the lack of insurance to cover these losses. With no safety net, Many felt abandoned and began protesting the government's measures. This unrest revealed that the honeybee crisis wasn't just biological or economic, it was deeply political and social as well. Outrage spread quickly, bringing together the voices of farmers and amateur beekeepers alike. The psychological toll soon became evident. Reports of anxiety, depression, and even identity crises emerged among beekeepers who had lost everything. For many, beekeeping wasn't just a job, it was a way of life. The abrupt end of that connection felt like watching a part of themselves vanish with the hives. This collective trauma made one thing painfully clear: this wasn't just about numbers or statistics. The bee colony collapse in Australia struck at the heart of people's lives, revealing the human vulnerability behind sudden ecological change. And in the midst of that pain and resistance came the growing realization that the strategy to fight the mite needed a complete rethinking. By 2023, it became clear that the complete eradication of the Varroa mite was impossible. After millions spent and thousands of hives destroyed, Australia chose to turn the page. The focus shifted to Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. The idea was simple: instead of fighting to eliminate the enemy, learn to live with it. IPM brought a new mindset to Australia beekeeping. Beekeepers began receiving training, learning how to monitor their colonies and act before infestations spiraled out of control. This hands-on education made a real difference, empowering even hobbyists to adopt effective practices. It was like turning every beekeeper into a trained soldier on the front lines of the bee battlefield. Part of this shift also included the introduction of regulated parasites. While not a perfect solution, they helped buy time for colonies to recover. The logic was straightforward: use science and discipline to level the playing field. The bee colony collapse was still a threat, but its impact was beginning to be contained. This new chapter wasn't just about agricultural techniques, it was a collective change in mindset. Government agencies, beekeepers, and pollination agriculture farmers began working more closely together. And as this adaptation took root, something unexpected began happening inside the hives themselves. While many believed the future relied solely on chemistry and technology, the bees themselves began to surprise us. Some colonies started exhibiting Varroa's sensitive hygiene VSH behavior, meaning the bees were identifying and removing infected brood on their own. It was as if nature had triggered a dormant survival instinct. Another observed behavior was grooming, where bees literally cleaned themselves and each other, removing parasites in the process. This small act brought immense relief to Australia beekeeping. The more bees are able to respond on their own, the less they depend on human intervention. It's like watching a collective organism develop its own immune defense. This phenomenon opened the door to genetic improvement programs. Scientists began selecting bee lineages with natural resistance to the mite, reinforcing the foundation of pollination agriculture. Imagine hives that not only produce honey, but also carry inherited resistance traits, turning each new generation into a stronger, more prepared force. At the same time, interest surged in Australia's native bees. Over 1,700 species spread across the continent. While they don't produce honey in large quantities, they are efficient pollinators and naturally resistant to the Varroa mite. This diversification brought new hope and sparked a wave of scientific research. And as these alternatives emerged, another powerful debate began to take shape. How far can technology go before it becomes a trap? With each scientific breakthrough, an uncomfortable question began to grow louder. Could technology itself create new vulnerabilities? Probiotic treatments and RNAi-based solutions showed promise against the Varroa mite. But some experts warned that over-reliance on these tools could create a cycle of dependency. After all, if the pest adapted to these methods, it might come back even stronger. This dilemma isn't unique to Australia beekeeping. It echoes across various sectors, from agriculture to medicine. Think of antibiotics. Their overuse led to the rise of drug-resistant superbugs. Similarly, high-tech treatments for bees would need to be applied with caution to avoid becoming tomorrow's problem. For the everyday beekeeper, this translates into a delicate balancing act. Technology should be used as an ally, not a crutch. Monitoring hives, diversifying bee species, and maintaining healthy habitats remain essential steps. The honeybee crisis has proven there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Layered strategies are always the safer route. This fear of overdependence sparked a new wave of innovation. Researchers, governments, and beekeepers began to explore more sustainable alternatives, blending biotech with time-tested practices. And from that movement, a new landscape of discovery and experimentation began to take shape. The search for alternatives sparked a true boom in scientific experimentation. Among the standout innovations were RNAi trials, which aimed to silence specific genes in the Varroa mite. Probiotics also gained traction, helping boost the bee's natural immunity. At the same time, biocontrol research explored fungi and bacteria capable of attacking the parasite directly. In parallel, urban beekeeping in cities like Sydney and Melbourne grew rapidly. Rooftops and even small backyards began to host thriving hives amid urban landscapes. This trend brought the issue closer to the public eye, showing that the honeybee crisis wasn't some distant rural concern. It was part of everyday life in major cities. Another major breakthrough was the integration of real-time data through hive tracking apps. Beekeepers could now monitor colony health from their smartphones, receiving instant alerts about potential threats. This tech upgrade added a whole new layer of efficiency to Australia beekeeping, like a digital checkup system constantly watching over each hive. This wave of innovation revealed something powerful. The crisis could also be a driver of creativity. What once looked like a total disaster was evolving into a moment of collective learning. And as these solutions took hold across Australia, other countries began watching every move with growing interest. The Australian experience quickly caught the attention of countries around the world. After all, the continent that had long been a sanctuary from the Varroa mite was now fighting the same battle faced globally. This shift turned the nation into a vast open-air laboratory. Every decision made in Australia beekeeping was closely observed by international researchers. Governments and agricultural institutions began using the case as a framework for their own policies. Some viewed Australia's early missteps, such as over-reliance on eradication, as cautionary tales to avoid. Others were inspired by its swift adoption of integrated pest management and rapid training efforts. The Australian honeybee crisis became a replicable case study. For global pollination agriculture, this marked a collective awakening. Farmers realized that it's not enough to rely on strong hives. Long-term resilience is essential. Several countries reinforced border monitoring, while others expanded genetic improvement programs. The ripple effects of the crisis reached far beyond honey, touching the core of global food security. This domino effect turned Australia into an unintentional teacher for the world. What first appeared to be an isolated disaster evolved into shared knowledge, capable of saving colonies across continents. And as the calendar moved toward 2025, the country began to reap the first, albeit partial, rewards of that collective learning journey. As 2025 approached, the Varroa mite had not been eliminated, but it was under control. Australia had learned how to coexist with the threat, turning pest management into a daily discipline within the fabric of Australia beekeeping. What once seemed like the end of an era became the beginning of a new chapter, where colony survival now depends on vigilance, consistency, and continuous innovation. Pollination agriculture began to regain momentum, though not without adjustments. Farmers and beekeepers now work more collaboratively, understanding that pollination is a shared engine. Contracts became more detailed, sanitation protocols stricter, and cooperation an essential part of the system. The result, greater predictability and more stable harvests. The honeybee crisis also brought an unexpected consequence, a rise in public awareness. Children began learning in schools about the role of bees. Media campaigns highlighted the importance of pollination, and community-driven urban beekeeping initiatives gained traction. The The topic was no longer confined to experts, it became part of everyday life. This landscape turned the crisis into a catalyst for innovation. Once known simply as a Varroa-free outlier, Australia now stands as a global leader in coexistence with the mite. The country has shown that even the greatest threats can carry within them the seeds of groundbreaking solutions. Australia's honeybee crisis revealed that even the smallest creatures can teach us grand lessons. The Varroa mite didn't just expose the vulnerability of hives, it highlighted humanity's ability to innovate, endure, and adapt. Every step taken by beekeepers and farmers is a reminder that the balance between nature and technology is more delicate than we often realize. The rebirth of Australia beekeeping and the strengthening of pollination agriculture prove that, even in the face of adversity, cooperation can turn crises into opportunity. Hives once thought doomed now show remarkable resilience, and society itself has begun to view bees with newfound respect. It's a turning point few would have believed possible. And that's where the real challenge lies. If bees can reinvent themselves in the face of the greatest threat in their history, what could we learn from them? Perhaps the answer is to apply that same spirit of adaptation and courage to the challenges we face in our own lives every single day. So don't stop here. Keep following this journey. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join a community that seeks to see beyond the obvious. Because just like the bees, each of us holds the power to turn hardship into new beginnings.